Hi there, welcome. Today we are going to talk about the difference between vector and raster files. So if you've been wondering what are the advantages and disadvantages, or where can we use one or the other one, today we are going to answer all those questions. So welcome, my name is Anna. I am a surface pattern designer and educator. All right, so welcome to Machita Design Academy. Today we're going to talk about the difference between vector and raster files. So I'm gonna first give you an official definition. It might not make a lot of sense, but we're gonna talk a little bit more about it so it starts making a little bit more sense. So there are two types of files that we can use when we're creating our designs. They are either vector or raster files. Vector files are patterns that are created digitally, but they are created by a computer mathematical formula that renders them in a particular way. While the raster files are also digital files, but they are made out of tiny little pixels, what makes them resolution dependent. So now I'm gonna break it up in more understandable concepts. So a vector file is a little smoother and it will allow you to make it in a specific size, but then you could always make it bigger if you need to. Because of the formula, it's going to smooth out the endings or the edges, so the file looks better. When you create a raster file, because it's made out of tiny pixels, the size that you create is the biggest size that you can have that particular file printed on anything. Because if you make it bigger, then the little tiny pixels start showing up. So to get around this, if you want your design printed in a big, like wallpaper or something like that, then you gotta create a big canvas for that particular design. So the bigger the canvas, the more pixels. Therefore, when it's printed big, you're not gonna have those tiny little pixels showing up. So that's kind of a little bit of the disadvantage of the raster files. However, they have advantages as well because they are better for showing textures. Like if you have a watercolor texture and you would like that to show in your designs, the vector files would not be good for that. You would rather want to use a raster file for that particular design because it will show your painting more authentically than when you convert it to a vector file. So you have to decide what type of design are you looking to make, if you think you're ever going to need to scale it or not, and then decide based on that. So I created a little table that kind of has the specific of each one of these files. So like I mentioned, a vector file is created by a mathematical formula, while the raster file is made out of tiny little pixels, okay? So that means that the vector file, you can scale it as much as you want. However, the raster file has a limited resolution. If you make it big, you will look the quality and the pixels will start showing if you want much bigger file than the one that you originally created. However, with the vector files, it's going to be a little harder to blend colors, to show textures and things like that. So for that, it's much better to use a raster file because it's very good at blending colors and capturing the essence of some strokes, like watercolor, acrylics, things like that. Vector files tend to be a little smaller, so that's good. And the raster files, because they contain maybe a little bit more information on those pixels, they end up being bigger files. When I started using vector and raster files, I was a little confused about what type of files were what. There's a little bit of overlap, but for the most part, a vector file is anything you create in Illustrator, so AI, CDR, a PDF, SVG, and EPS. Those are vector files that will allow you to scale your design if you need to. Raster files are JPEGs, PNGs, GIF, TIFF, BMP, PDF, and PSD. So what that means is that when I create a design using Illustrator or Adobe Fresco, my files are vector, not always. You could select some options in Fresco that are not vector, but you could create vector images in Fresco. When I create something with Photoshop or Procreate, then I'm gonna have a raster file. So it really depends. If I'm drawing from scratch, maybe I wanna start with Fresco. If I'm scanning a watercolor or something like that, maybe I wanna move it to Photoshop. If I'm looking for a more texture pattern, I might create it in Procreate because it will keep a little bit of those strokes more authentic. So a vector file in general is a little less detailed, and a raster file can be more detailed, and you can show a little bit more with that. Just to give you an idea, when I have a vector file, it will look like this, smooth, no matter how big I make the file. However, when it's raster and I make it bigger, then I start showing those pixels that I told you about. These are just some of the files that would be raster, just one of the ones that would be vector, but there are other ones that I mentioned in the previous slide. So in general, a few tips to work with raster files just to make sure that you don't run into issues is pretty much the thing that I've already mentioned. You have to make sure that your design is the size of the product that you want to show that design. So you create the canvas accordingly to the dimensions of the desired products. You can also watch for the DPI on your file. I would say nothing less than 300 DPIs, sometimes maybe 150, but I would just make sure that I go with a 300 DPI. More information, make sure my files don't look pixelated. And I also make a point of not making any of my raster files bigger than what I originally create. So if I decide on a canvas size, I keep it at that size, I don't make it bigger. There are options for you to convert a raster file to a vector file. It might look a little bit of like the natural textures and things like that, but there are options where if you have a file and then you end up wanting to make it bigger, you could convert it. But we can talk about that maybe some other time. But this is what I wanted to talk about for you today. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much for watching today. If you have questions or would like to reach out, this is my info. See you soon. Bye.